Welcome to Aristeia 101. Today we're going to be talking about simple synergies, and for an example, we're going to be using the green team from the Aristeia core set. Now the core set has two teams. It has the orange team, it also has the green team. We're going to be starting off with the green team just because, well, why the heck not? Now, the four characters featured in this team would be Hexxer, would be Maximus, Major Lunah, and Parvati. So we're going to kind of look over each of the characters and kind of how they all interact and mesh and mingle with each other. So now we're going to have this broken up into sections, and we're also going to go over the tactics cards as they relate to the team as a whole. So first off, we're going to be looking at Maximus, and we're going to be kind of looking at him as the cornerstone for this team. Now, the team overall is relatively low health, with Maximus being the exception. Their defense is pretty good, except for Hexxer. And we got to note here that Hexxer has no attacks. Lunah has a minimum range of 3, so anyone gets in close to her is bad news. Likewise, Parvati has a minimum range of 2. Close combat is just flat out dangerous for this team, and this is really where you need Maximus. He is going to be essentially the bodyguard, the defense for close to mid-range skirmishes when it comes to the board. And with that in mind, taunting is going to be vital for keeping his teammates alive. You're going to want to find a way to make rolls throughout the game in order to make sure he gets his character switch, which is, of course, a taunt. Now, the two abilities you're going to want to pay a special attention to are going to be Implacable and Get Behind Me. These are going to be very necessary to make up for his low movement. Implacable is important, but ideally it should be so we can switch between 2 or even 3 characters versus actually getting to them. This is where he needs help, to be perfectly honest, is compensating for his relatively low in-turn speed. And yes, the fact that he can indeed displace himself 1 when a character is attacked does help, but the problem is a character is having an attack declared on them. This is a relatively low health team, so when that happens, it's got the potential of, okay, I moved and the character is dead, or in the infirmary rather. But really what you want to do with Max is you want to either tie up melee focused characters such as, say, Musashi or well, really even 8-Ball. You want to have him being a human block for them, or perhaps even blocking line of sight for, say, Wild Bill. He is difficult to get away from, so maybe even tying up Gata, although really the biggest thing is you're trying to use him to keep the others alive. Now, whether he is doing that by deliberately tying someone up or blocking line of sight, or he's soaking up damage for a teammate, is going to depend on how things go. You need to expect this to be a very fluid thing. And you need to be adaptable in terms of how you're using him. And really, this team's going to force you to do that. So with tactics, we're going to guys force tactics, and this is going to be up to you to decide how you want to do things. So block will actually get a lot of mileage in this team. Gives 2 blues, and even though, again, the defense on this team is actually not too bad. You've got a lot of, except for Hexxer, there's a lot of blue and green and blue defense rolls. This core set of characters, you've got these real pronounced strengths, but in the end, it's still going to be very useful just because you've got a lot of characters out there who can put out a lot of damage. Scram is actually a very good card, and it can help a more fragile character get some breathing room. Basically, if enemies are adjacent to you, or really targets, meaning even allies, if they're adjacent to you, you can displace them so you can get breathing room from melee characters. You can get away from people that would normally keep you stuck somewhere with the disengage and the brawl rolls, things like that. You can even use this to, push Max ahead one more if he's adjacent to the character using it. So this actually gives you, even though it's a one-shot for that, it does give you some options in terms of what you can do, and I like the fact that any of the characters can use it. Freeze is not a bad card. I have used it before. However, you do have to ask if there are better options for mobilization in this case. Hexxer's Gotcha would be a great example. Freeze is a single use on a single target, and they have to be taunted. So you do... It's not bad. It is not a bad card, but it's going to be a little more situational, and you do have to wonder, maybe there's something better that can be used. It's not a bad thing to have, especially if you are able to keep the taunts coming out, but there might be easier cards to use. A powerful card that never gets used because the right situation never comes up wasn't that powerful card. Powerful card's one that's been used. That said, it does give Major Lunah's Snakebite another opportunity to get extra damage in. That's always nice. Finally, with Maximus, we're going to look at Adamantine. This is a great card for big attacks that Max might receive. This is actually relatively dependent on your opponent. They might not want to try and they might not bother trying to send Max to the infirmary. There have been many games that I've played where that is actually the least of my concerns. I do think it's a good card, especially if you're playing the core set and your opponent's playing the orange team. You can try to make Maximus something they have to deal with. But generally speaking, I would rather kick out Max's supports than try and kick out Max. It's just a lot of work, and he does come back. All the characters do, and the -2 energy that gets put on him can be taken off fairly quickly by Parvati. Next up, I want to look at Hexxer. And essentially, we're looking at her as the chess master. As we mentioned with Maximus, this group does have trouble with ranges. It's not long ranges per se, it's close ranges. The closer the enemies get in, the more uncomfortable things become. Maximus is slow and has no ranged attacks other than Contender. Contender is singularly the worst attack in the game, but it's the universal one that everyone has, and it's probably the worst. Lunah and Parvati have minimum ranges, so you really want to use Vade Retro, for instance, to keep everyone where they want to be. So Max pushing him forward towards the enemies or towards high-risk teammates would be something to look at. With Lunah and Parvati, you want to make sure that their enemy targets stay away from them, or at the very least that Lunah and Parvati are pulled further back, depending on what the ebb and the flow of the game is. Certainly with Lunah, if you can just nudge her one so she can get cover, and she's able to convert that black block die into an orange die, that's fantastic. And really, Hexxer here is to make sure that you can try and get everyone in better positioning. Maybe not necessarily optimal. If you're always able to get the optimal position, then your opponent's letting you do that. And you should probably have a conversation with your opponents about, hey, you know, when I'm trying to do that, you should be looking at this. You shouldn't let me do that. These friendly conversations to improve the game of your opponent will make your Aristeia games a lot more satisfying. So, we do, again, she has no attacks of her own, but the nice thing is, with support, we've gone over movement, evade, retro, but do keep in mind too that she can immobilize or slow using gotcha, and that's going to be big. Max can catch up to someone who's immobilized or moving too less than normal. Characters like Musashi and Gata are a little bit easier to deal with when they're slow or not moving at all. You want to, as much as you help yourself, your team get around the board, you want to inhibit your opponents from getting around, getting to your vulnerable characters, which includes Hexxer herself, especially with her ranges. But you really want to make sure that if you can't be in the optimal position, you want to stop them from being so as well. Now, when it comes to tactics, and we're looking at this, unlimited power is superior to Maximus's Scram in several regards, but it's only usable on enemies, and it has a -2 energy on it. So you use it, you're going to get a -2 energy token on it. It'll flip at the end of your turn, so it's not as bad as it could be. It'll just be a -1. And this can be countered by Parvati's reset. So it's very powerful, and it's something you really shouldn't be afraid of using. I would be thoughtful. If you only need one character moving, maybe not the best time, but multiple, oh, absolutely. It could really be a game changer in that regard. Untouchable is only for Hexxer, but since it keeps her alive, that's not a bad thing when you consider she has the weakest defense of the whole team. Likewise, when you consider her role for the team, keeping her alive again is just, it's a good thing. It should absolutely be part of your game plan. Now, access denied's -2 movement is it's a very powerful ability, but you do need to set this up so at the beginning of because it's done at the beginning of Hexxer's activation. If you hide behind Maximus or behind an obstacle, block space, that would help mitigate the risk. It's a range 1 to 3, no line of sight. And again, you're just slowing down. You can't move as fast. That's very powerful. At the very least, if you can't discourage pursuers, if you can use it to slow down someone who would normally be a scoring character, depending on the scenario. Assault, slowing down Gata wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, for instance. And we're going to look finally at Ragdoll. It's a double-edged sword since Evade Retro can be used on friendly as well as enemies. So if you decide to use, I'm going to use Ragdoll, it pretty much prevents you from using Evade Retro on your allies for the rest of the round, but it does help with survivability. The limiting range from offensive, limited range from offense from enemies is one thing, but allowing your range damage dealers to attack without fear of receiving damage back is huge. Especially when you look at this is a low health team. And another thing to look at as well, this frees up your tactics choices. You can not add a dodge or block and favor things that give you more focus or more damage like aim. So no, Ragdoll certainly, and it's certainly the more opponents you can hit with it, the better. Now, when you do look at Hexxer's ranges on her Veda Retro and on Gotcha, she does have to be kind of close in. Her and Maximus kind of go together well because of that. He needs to be close to do things, and she doesn't have a distance game so much. She is going to be from mid to close range, whether she likes it or not. Major Lunah, we're looking at her as ranged support. Now, obviously she is a sniper. Yeah, that's very an obvious use, and this is not inaccurate. But do not forget suppressive fire. It does have a chance for uncontested damage, which is nice, but the -2 movement is going to be big, especially early on in the game, because if you can stop your opponent from coming forward, from attacking, or from going out and scoring, or coming up and supporting their own characters, that's huge. And it's easier to do when you can work with their range limitations. And since honestly unsuppressed fire is not an attack, they don't get to make defense rolls. This again makes it a lot easier to use. And gosh, certainly the fact that it is not an attack means they don't get to make defensive rolls that they can try and boost up for damage. That is very important. Again, we got a low health team here. But the other way of supporting her team is, of course, shooting people in the face, because, well, a good offense is definitely part of a good defense. I do want to point out that while Lunah's targets cannot benefit from cover, again, Lunah can. So, looking back at Hexxer, using her to make sure she has cover is going to be very helpful. And again, making sure that those darn minimum ranges are being observed. If an enemy's 2 spaces away, you need to move the enemy or Major Lunah 1 so they can get the 3 spaces and therefore be in the minimum range. Usually being just outside, the 8 spaces, maybe not such a big deal, but it's the minimum range is the one that's most dangerous for Lunah, just because that's where she gets to be in trouble, where she all of a sudden has to start making defensive rolls, whether she likes it or not, and she doesn't have any real. It's just not her happy place. It really isn't. Now, the thing with Lunah is you want to set her up as well. If you can get her to do 2 suppressive fires, or a called shot and suppressive fire in a round, that's pretty much ideal. The less movement she has to do on her own, the better. And again, we're looking back to Hexxer and Veda Retro, or even Unlimited Power are the obvious ways to help with that. For Maximus, though, if you use Scram or Jotun Shield, you're not necessarily trying to move Lunah in these cases, but certainly moving her targets. You want to make sure that a target is within line of sight for her, or is within range, and that's where Hexxer and Maximus can help out. For tactics, well, Spawn and Opening is a good card for the team as a whole. It's a good way to deal with criticals if you don't have the means to do so otherwise. It's not guaranteed that you'll end the threat of the critical or whatever dice you have re-rolled, but the odds will be relatively in your favor unless it's kind of average. Again, a critical is a 1 in 6 chance on a green or a red. So Holographic Sight is a great card for this team in general. While it is only for 1 action, you're extending the range of that action or that attack. So Maximus's Jotun Shields would have more possibility of being used, because you go from a 1-1 to a 1-3 range. Hexxer's Gotcha and Vade Retro, they get more range, which is safer for her. Parvati having more range for her submachine guns akimbo, for her reset, for medkits. That's awesome. That's all great stuff. And naturally, Lunah herself benefits from this. It's not... I'm not going to say it doesn't have the same utility as by inches, which you can find in the advanced tactics decks, but it is, since that gives you either +1 range or -1 on minimum, but it's still really good. Now, Ricochet is a great card for Lunah, a great reason to use this is in support of vulnerable teammates. Again, a good offense is a good defense. Softening enemies for other characters is important as well. Max is not a massive damage dealer, for instance. Likewise, Parvati might need defending should an enemy get inside her minimum range. So just not having to worry about the line of sight issues quite as much is really big, even if it's just for one shot. Finally, Snakebite can take advantage of Gotcha from Hexxer, plus the combination of Vade Retro with Ragdoll, or Freeze from Maximus. Using a suppressive fire before major Lunah attacks would work as well. And this is just because it gives you an extra automatic success for damage. Now that said, the additional orange die plus an excess does help even if a bonus damage condition isn't met. Snakebite is a very good card to put on Lunah. Finally, we're going to look at Parvati. She is basically to help keep the team moving. Healing and state removal is kind of the bread and butter for Parvati in many team compositions. Here, she's going to have to kind of split her attention between team support and attacking enemies, partly because of Maximus's low damage, and partly because Hexxer doesn't have any attacks. Damage mitigation via Hexxer and Maximus are going to be important because she is in the split role. Hexxer needs to basically deal with the melee characters so that they can't get to everyone else. Likewise, Maximus kind of has to deal with everything damage-wise. So using those two to prevent damage is going to be every bit as important as using a Parvati to heal damage. The best damage is the damage you don't have to heal. Now, submachine guns akimbo will be important for their damage. The range isn't as good as Major Lunah's, but with 2 oranges, it should be fairly reliable. With those and the yellow, her switch ought be hit regularly. And this is going to be important because, well, if you go first, you decide how things go. So are you going to take the initiative or are you going to wait and see? And you only have that option if you win the initiative. Now, whether you get the initiative and you're the underdog with it, or you just win it outright, kind of academic, but again, having that bonus is certainly better than not. So with the tactics options, first foremost, Reset 2.0 is going to be very powerful, and that can happen during any of your character's turns and has no range on it. This is very important. It does not specify it has to be used on an allied target, so you could remove a beneficial state from an enemy, such as Hidden with Dart, Focused, Poisoned on Hammerhead, and pretty much anything on Bachman. Now that said, it does remove all states, so consider the benefit versus cost if you do use it on a friendly teammate with a positive state on them. Admittedly, in this case, you're only going to have the plus initiative with Parvati. Nanoid Cloud is a nice little heal for a single point to all allies. It's not a strong heal, but it doesn't cost any energy. It has no range. Now that said, everyone but Maximus, it pretty much restores a whole third of their health. So in this context, it's actually fairly powerful when you look at it in those terms. Now, advanced surgery is kind of a preemptive reset 2.0. The only state you're dealing with is the -2 energy, generally speaking, but this is quite significant when you consider how little health this team has overall. 3 points of health, that's kind of easy to take out, unfortunately. Even with a fairly good defense that many of the team has. But also note, this does not specify an ally. So you could remove the -2 energy from Bachman from the get-go, for instance. While this team is overall inexpensive in terms of energy costs, with a lot of their abilities being, 2 points or even 1 points, -2 energy is still detrimental. And finally, you've got field analysis. Field analysis is good for all characters and turns when you need to decide who goes first. We've been over this with a Parvati switch. It's only usable once, so it's a card that has a discernible opportunity cost. When you have it in your hand, you really need to be thinking, is this the right time to use it? Is this the right turn? Is this the right matchup? Especially if it's a slower character going against say you got Max going against Musashi, for instance. It's like, do I want to do this now? Do I want to do this now? You got to think about that. What we got there is kind of the simple synergies that you would find in the Aristeia green team. Hexxer, Maximus, Major Lunah, and Parvati. The getting to use them all together and basically supporting each other. And I think that's really what this team is about, is teaching you support and watching your ranges. It's going to be very important for really learning the game overall. The orange team's got a lot of fun stuff in it as well, but they're just the other half. So you really, if you're new to the game, you should absolutely play both. Speaking of which, next week we will be covering the orange team. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time.